subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can create a dynamic map chart. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a dynamic map chart to show the gross sales plotted in bubbles on a map of the world. And the size of the bubble is going to represent the gross sales. So for example, the bigger the bubble, the higher the sales. And you can see a completed version on the screen in front of you. This is what we're aiming for. So if you take a look at the map in the middle, I have the total gross sales for each country plotted in the correct location on the map for that particular country. And what you'll also see is that just above, I have a little data validation drop-down menu, which allows me to switch between products. The map will update and the bubble size will also change depending on those values. And what you'll also notice is that these bubbles aren't all the same color. What I'm also doing is I'm highlighting in different colors the highest gross sales and also the lowest gross sales. So by using this method, it's very simple for me to analyze this and see that South Africa has the highest gross sales and Russia has the lowest. Now, creating something like this does require quite a bit of preparation work. So we're going to dive straight in and I'm going to show you exactly how I did this. So we're going to start right from the beginning. All I have on the worksheet currently is my table of data, which is currently showing the products, the countries, and we have 10 different countries in there, and then the gross sales by product and country. You'll see that I have a space for my data validation drop-down list, and I also have a preparation area over on the right-hand side. Now, in order to achieve this type of chart, we need to combine a few different techniques in Excel. And you might think to yourself, well, we're using a map, so maybe I could use a map chart for this. But we actually can't. Now, the way that we're going to do this is we're going to insert a blank chart, and then we're going to fill the background of that chart with the image of a map. And then on that chart, we're going to plot the locations of each of the countries in our data table. Now, what we're aiming for here is to end up with a map where we have our bubbles exactly on the country on that map that they represent. So the first step of this process is to load up a map and mark on that map where these countries are, the position of those countries on the map. And we do this in what's probably going to seem a little bit of a strange way. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a blank scatter plot chart, because scatter plots contain markers that move along the X and Y axis. Now, whenever you're inserting a blank chart, make sure that you're not clicked in your data. If I was to insert it from where I'm currently clicked, it's just going to use the data that I have surrounding where I'm clicked and plot it in the chart. And I just want a blank one. So let's click on a blank cell, up to insert, across to our charts group, and then I'm going to choose scatter. And you'll see that it's blank because it doesn't have any data. Now I'm going to move that into position and let's just make this a little bit wider and a little bit taller. So this is basically where my map is going to go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm essentially going to fill the background of this chart with an image of a map. Now, where you get your image of a map from is entirely up to you. I will say when it comes to downloading images of maps from something like Google, you do have to be a little bit careful when it comes to copyright. So whichever map you choose to use, make sure that you do check the copyright on that image, particularly if this worksheet is going to be used for commercial purposes. Now, I already have a map chart downloaded, and that's the one that I'm going to use. So we go about this in the same way we would go about filling something like a shape. If we right-click on the chart and go down to Format Chart Area, we can then expand Fill, and we can choose what we want to fill this chart area with. So I'm going to fill it with a picture. Now, because this map was the last image that I used, Excel remembers it and it automatically populates your last action. If you don't get the correct image there, all you need to do is click on Insert, and then you can choose a location on your local drives where you have the image saved, or you can search online pictures for a world map. But remember, as I said, check the copyright before you use anything from online. So now we basically have 10 countries and we want to plot their locations on this map. Now, before we get into doing that, I want to make sure that when I'm plotting and making changes, my chart doesn't start moving around or resize itself. So from the Format Chart Area panel that we already have open on the right-hand side, let's jump across to Size and Properties and expand both of these. And I'm going to say Lock Aspect Ratio and also Don't Move or Size with Cells to really lock that chart into position. So now that we've got that sorted, we need to start adding onto this map our markers so we can see the position of each of the countries. And remember, essentially what this is a scatter graph. And scatter graphs use the X and Y axes to position their markers, their plots. So this next bit requires a little bit of imagination as we are essentially working blind. If you look at this map chart, we have to try and imagine that running across the X axes, we have markers 1 to 10. Now it doesn't necessarily have to be 1 to 10, you can use whatever scale you like. I just tend to always use 1 to 10. So what I mean by that is imagine that the far left corner here is 0 and the far right corner is 10. And the middle here is going to be marker 5, and we would have 1 about here, 2 maybe here, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And the same running down the x-axis. So we're going to use the x and y axes as coordinates to plot the location of the countries on the map. So to help us with this, we're going to create a little preparation area. We're going to type in here x values, y values, and then let's just have the country name so we know which one we're doing. And just to keep things nice and consistent, let's just use our format painter and paint that format across all of these. So let's just grab our 10 countries, Control C to copy, and I'm just going to Control V to paste those in. So the first country that we're plotting on this map is Canada, and I need to tell Excel what the X and Y coordinates are for Canada. So Canada's up here, so I need to provide rough X and Y values for Canada. And remember, you can change this after when the markers are in place. So for Canada, what could my X value be? Well, if I'm working across this scale, Canada is roughly here, and if we go down, I'm going to say that's possibly about 1.5 along that X axis. And what would the Y axis be? Well, it's pretty high up here, so maybe about a 9. What about India? Well, India is all the way over here, so I'm going to say that looks to be about an 8 on the X axis. And possibly about a 6 on that y-axis. USA, well, that's roughly in the same position on the x-axis as Canada, so we'll go with 1.5, but it's a little bit further down, so let's go for a 7 on that y-axis. And I'm going to carry on going, completing rough coordinates for the rest of the countries. So I'm going to do that, and I'll join you back here in a couple of seconds. So now I have those rough X and Y values in, I need to add these as data series into this chart. So let's click on the chart, right click the mouse, and we're going to go to Select Data. Let's say Add. My series name, it's always good to give your series a name, so I'm going to call these Position. And then we need to complete our X and Y values. So my X values are located just here. And my Y values are located just here. And click on OK. And OK again. And you can now see Excel has a go at plotting these values on this chart. Now before we start to reposition these markers, I'm going to remove everything from this chart which we don't need. So I don't really need this little title here. Let's delete that out. And I'm also going to delete out these grid lines, both the horizontal and the vertical. And I also don't really need the X and Y axes, so let's delete both of these out as well. Now that we've done that, we can really take a good look at where our markers are positioned and make any minor adjustments that we need to. So I can see that I've been pretty good with where I've plotted these, but I can see here Canada is a little bit high, so let's move that down very slightly. So on the y-axis, I'm going to put that down to 8.7, and you'll see as I hit enter, that dot is going to move down. I'm going to move the USA, let's just move that across a bit, let's say 1.3. And the rest of these look pretty good. Maybe I move India a little bit, so where do we have India? Just here. I'm going to move that to 7.8 on the x-axis, and let's move it down very slightly, let's do 5.9. And there we go, I'm pretty happy with that. So now we've told Excel exactly where all of our countries are located on this map. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my data validation. Remember at the top here, we want to be able to cycle between the different products, and we only have 3 products in this list. And at the end, we're going to link it all together so that the chart updates when we select a different product. Now, when it comes to data validation, you can see I have all of my products listed down here. If I was just to use this range in my data validation dropdown to get my list items, because I have the same name repeated over and over, it's going to list that out in the list. Now, I don't want to see Montana listed out 10 times in my data validation dropdown, so I want to make this a unique list. Now, there are numerous different ways you can do this, but by far the easiest is by utilizing Excel's new unique function. So let's just widen out this column. And what I'm going to do here is type in equals unique, open my bracket, and I'm going to select the entire product range, Control Shift down. Close off the bracket, and then when you hit enter, it just gives you a list of all of the unique values. Now remember, because we've used a formula, the formula's sitting behind, that's not going to work so well when we do a data validation dropdown. So I'm going to do my favorite little trick here. I'm going to select everything, Control C to copy, and then I'm going to paste just the values, which will throw away the underlying formulas. I can now use this list to create my data validation dropdown. So let's go up to Data, across into Data Tools, and select Data Validation. I want a list of values, and my source is going to be what we have just here. Now, if you're using a version of Excel that's older than the one that I'm using, you might find that you don't have the unique function available because it is a very new function. If you don't, what you could do is simply just type in the values that you want to use directly into the source. Let's click on OK. And now you should see that I have a little data validation and I can cycle between those different products. And then what I'm going to do here is just simply hide this column. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to pull in our gross sales figures. Currently, this chart isn't really showing me anything. It's just showing where these countries are located. What I'm aiming for is to have bubbles where these markers are, which are sized according to the gross sales for that particular country. So now I need to use a formula and pull that into my preparation table. So let's add another column, and we're going to call this gross sales. And I want to find out the gross sales for each of the countries. So for this, I need to use a sum-ifs formula. And the reason I'm going to use sum-ifs is because I have multiple criteria to calculate the gross sales. I want to sum the gross sales when the country is Canada and the product is whatever I've selected in here. So let's type in equals sum-ifs and open our bracket. What is my sum range? Well, my sum range is the gross sales. Control Shift down to select. And because I'm going to drag this formula down, I want to make sure that I lock this range, F4 to lock, comma, criteria range 1. Well, my first piece of criteria is going to be I want to sum the gross sales if the country is Canada. So which range will I find Canada in? I will find it in the country range. Control Shift down to select, F4 to lock, comma. What criteria am I looking for in that range? Well, I'm looking for Canada. Now I don't have to lock this because I'm going to drag it down, and that's absolutely fine in this case. Comma. What is my second piece of criteria? Well, I then want Excel to see what product I've selected in the drop-down. So my criteria range is the product, Control Shift down and F4 to lock. And my criteria is whatever I've selected in F3, F4 to lock. That is my sum-ifs formula. Let's close the bracket and hit enter. And now I can safely drag this down, and I'm getting a total of the gross sales for each country depending on what I've selected up here. And you'll notice if I change this to Pasio, all of those figures update nicely. So now that we have these gross sales figures, we need to pull these into the chart and represent them as bubbles. So remember, currently I'm using a scatter chart. We use that so we could plot our country markers. But now I'm going to change this to a bubble chart. So let's right click, change chart type, and we're going to select bubble and click on OK. Don't worry too much about the size of these bubbles and where they're positioned because we're going to change that in a moment. So currently all of these bubbles are exactly the same size. So let's select them, right click, and we're going to go to Select Data. Let's click on Edit, and you can see now we have an additional series at the bottom called Bubble Size, and this is where we can pull in those gross sales figures. Now the first thing we need to do here is need to re-add our X values. So let's click in there and select. Our Y values are fine, but when it comes to series bubble size, this is where we want to use our new gross sales figures. And you should see as soon as I do that, these bubbles start to resize according to the value in that range. And click on OK. Now my bubbles aren't plotted in exactly the same location as the markers, and that is because of the size of these bubbles. So let's right click and say Format Data Series, and I'm going to scale my bubble size down to 60%. And you can see now they move into the correct positions on the chart. So we're pretty much nearly there. There's just a few other things that we need to do here just to make this a little bit easier to understand. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add some data labels. And you can see currently it's adding the data labels of the Y values. And I don't want it to show that. I actually want it to show the gross sales instead. So let's click on our data labels, right click, Format Data Labels. Underneath label options, you can see it's currently showing the Y values, but I want it to show the bubble size instead of the Y value. And if we go down to label position, I want them to be positioned in the center of the bubble. Now, whilst I have all of these labels highlighted, I'm just going to apply some bold formatting, Control B. And I'm also going to change these to white. Let's just check to make sure this is working. If I choose something else from my drop down, you can see everything updates and those bubble sizes change. Now, the final thing I'm going to do here, just to make this even easier to understand, is that I'm going to get Excel to highlight the bubble that shows the maximum gross sales and also the minimum gross sales. So for this, we need to add another couple of columns into our data preparation table. I'm going to say max and min. And we need to do an if calculation just here. So we're going to do an if formula. And we're going to say if P7 equals the maximum value in this list, and we're going to F4 to lock that. If that is true, what do we want it to do? Well, if it is the maximum value, I want it to show the maximum value. If it's false, so if it's not the maximum value in that range, I want the cell to be blank. Close the bracket, hit enter, and then you'll notice that if we drag down, the only figure I should see is the maximum value in this range. I'm going to do exactly the same for the min. So let's say if this value is equal to the min of this range, F4 to lock. If that's true, I want it to return the value. If it's false, I want nothing in there. And let's drag this down and take a look at what we get. And there we go. Let's just apply some accounting formatting to this to make it the same as everything else. So now I need to bring these final columns into my chart so that it updates and reflects that. So once again, let's click on the chart, right click, select data. We're going to say add. My series name, the first one is going to be called max. So we're just going to click on that title. The X values are what we have just here. The Y values are just here, and the bubble size for this one is going to be what we have in here. And click on OK. Let's add another one, this time for min. And we're going to do the same thing. So these are our X values. These are our Y values, and our bubble size is going to be what's contained in here. And click on OK and OK again. And there we go. So now you can see the max value is highlighted in orange and the min value is actually highlighted in grey, which doesn't stand out too much because I have a grey map. So I'm quickly going to change my colours just here just to make this highlight a bit better. And there we go. Let's check to make sure it's working. Let's choose something else from our drop down And I can see that yes, that's all working nicely. Of course, you could go in and do a final couple of edits. So maybe I want to add a chart title, and I'm actually going to drag this down to the bottom. I'm going to apply some Lato black formatting, and the final thing I'm going to do here is just remove the outline from the chart. And I'm also going to remove the grid lines on the page just to make everything look a little bit cleaner. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the files the instructor used in this tutorial and follow along, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.